Hört man mich? Hi. Okay, this is not the official start. This is a short briefing for you. You are the analog audience. We have a digital audience over there. It's a Facebook live stream. And this is short instruction what we want to do for the whole evening because um, we start at 30 now. And after the live event, I will say to you something like, okay, bye, it's now over, and so on. But it's not really over for you, because you can stay here and have a Q&A after the talk with Aubrey Powell. And after the Q&A, we will have a movie, Making of the Dark Side of the Moon. It's about 50 minutes. And after this, we have another Q&A with Aubrey Powell. So you can join and stay here and asking anything you like. And we have the chance to ask questions during the talk. So even the Facebook audience and you can comment under the live stream, and we will write it down here. And this lady in front of us here will give it to me, and I will ask it if it fits. Has everybody understand it? Yes? Okay. So this is everything. Thank you very much. I hope you have a nice time this evening. So we start at 30, and now it's? All right. The hashtag. Hashtag the work of art. Hello, hello. Yo, microphone on. So, hello everybody. Welcome to the fourth edition of the Work of Art live event at Facebook. Welcome everybody to the digital audience, and thank you for coming here to the cinema at the Dortmunder U. And my name is Florian Zarevic, and I will be your host tonight for this episode. And yeah, thank you for coming. First, a few sentences about the event and the work of art and special smart places. The event is a series of art dialogues for the European audience within the framework of Smart Places. And all partners of Smart Places will host one of these sessions for the European public live on Facebook. The program includes 8 live sessions in which we will discuss and reflect the work and process of art with different participants and topics. The aim of the work of art is to offer the visitors the opportunity to know more about the cultural content and context behind it. So this was about the event and Smart Places, and I will introduce you now to our first guests. It will be Ulrike Brückner and Dennis Plauk, and here they are. Hello. Hi, please sit down. Ulrike Brückner is Professor of Concept and Design at the FH Dortmund. She studied visual communication in Amsterdam, Hamburg and Berlin. Won several Red Dots Awards, currently lives in Berlin and works as professor in Dortmund. Dennis Plauk is editor-in-chief at the Visions music magazine and Mint magazine. Worked also for Music Express and Süddeutsche Zeitung. And very interesting, he's also co-author of a biography of Martin Gore from Depeche Mode. Yeah, welcome. And yeah. And now I introduce you our special guest, and I want him to come in. He's creator of many iconic record covers and founding partner of Hypnosis Design Agency with Storm Ferguson together. He's creative director of Pink Floyd and co-curator of the Pink Floyd Exhibition that currently takes place here at the Dortmunder U. It's Mr. Aubrey Powell. Hello, Aubrey. So we have a special concept for tonight. It's I will introduce you of a short sentence about it. Maybe you have seen this box with some records in it, and the concept for tonight is I will always pick a record cover out of this and put it here. And the concept is, as you might see, you see nothing here because it's a white record cover. It's now 50 years old, and it's designed by Richard Hamilton. And yes, it's maybe another record cover, as you might know, because you don't see anything. It's like maybe it's a white canvas, or it was the end of an era for a band, or it's the beginning for a band or for the musicians, or the artist only wanted the artist only wanted to force you to use your imagination or invites you to create your own image on it. And this is the topic about what we want to talk today. It's creativity, inspiration, imagination, and create your own image. So I will put it back and take my first cover out, and this is, of course, it's a cover of Hypnosis. It's Atom Mother from Pink Floyd, and it was, I think it not only was a groundbreaking cover for the band, it was another cover for Hypnosis, because you see, you only see a cow and no band name and nothing else. So it's like, maybe like the White Album, it's like breaking the walls of record cover design. And this guides me to my first question. I will put it here in 1 second. It's my first question to Aubrey. What was your motivation to be creative, to do something like this, and to overcome borders?
Well, first of all, I can't possibly comment on my own cover without talking about the White Album. Because the White Album was done by Richard Hamilton for the Beatles, and at the time, we're talking about an era where revolution was in the air, and people were turning things around, specifically with music and with visuals and films. And the White Album was brought out, I think, probably as a part of that, and a way of saying, the Beatles saying, we can do anything we want. We don't have to have anything on the cover. We're fed up with having pictures of ourselves on the cover. We're fed up with generally being associated in some way to do with something as a commercial project and a commercial image that projects us. So we want to be anti-establishment. Now in Hypnosis, we called this a non-cover, because it is a non-cover. There's nothing on it. And the cow, for Atom Heart Mother, is the same thing. It's a non-cover. And I'll come on to that in a second. But my feeling about white cover, on a personal level, I feel it was a cop-out. I feel it was boring. I feel that it wasn't my style. I felt that Hypnosis style was very narrative. We always told a story. If you look at the image of the cow, there's a story there. What it is, who knows? But nevertheless, it's a picture which is about something. And I felt the Beatles really, in giving Richard Hamilton his way forward by creating a white cover, actually said nothing at all. Now you could say that's very Dadaist, and you could say that that is very Marcel Duchamp. However, it wasn't one of my favorite covers, I have to say. I'm sorry. I know people love the Beatles, they love the White Album. But that's a personal view. I don't know. Do you have a view about that? I'd be interested.
Yes, the white cover is finally a white page, and it's for me, or when you have different views on a white page. I heard that in Asia, a white page or an empty page is it's positive connected, like. Everything is possible, you can do whatever you want. And in Europe, it's more the fear of the white page. So it's about fear, nothing comes to my mind and I don't know what to say. And I like the twist in it also. It's interesting,
I would agree.
Yeah.
It doesn't have much to say, and that's my point.
I think it's also it is kind of a reaction to what the previous album cover looked like, the Sgt. Pepper's cover, there was so much going on that cover, and that's probably why they chose to go a very different route this time. And also, if you listen to the record, there's so much music going on there, and so much creativity, and the album cover is quite the opposite. It doesn't say anything about the music. It's contrary, and it makes people curious maybe about it. And I think when they saw that cover for the first time, and they might have expected something very, very mellow and very organized music, and what they got were so many different tunes, all kinds of genres and styles, and all four Beatles contributing to the songwriting process. So that's in a way kind of a narrative as well, isn't it?
I guess so. I suppose what you're saying is it's an anti-cover in a sense that what they're doing, it's all about the music inside and not what's on the outside. This is very Andy Warhol, I kind of feel, you know, in that sort of way. But if I might just talk about the cow cover for a second. Actually, no, before I do that, let's talk about Sgt. Pepper. You mentioned Sgt. Pepper. Now, Sgt. Pepper, for me, was probably the turning point in my career, because Hypnosis started 2 months before Sgt. Pepper came out, when we were asked to do a cover for Pink Floyd for Saucer Full of Secrets. Actually, they didn't ask us to do it. We volunteered to do it because we wanted to be part of that scene. And fortunately, it worked out. But I have to say that 2 months later, Peter Blake brought out Sgt. Pepper, and this changed my world. I suddenly realized that you could do anything on an album cover. You didn't have to have a photograph of the band. You didn't have to have something that related to what was inside the album. You didn't have to have something related to the lyrics. You didn't have to have something related to the band or the music or the title. And what you could do was create a living sculpture, which is what that is. It's Sgt. Pepper, to remind you, is full of cutouts of very famous personalities throughout the generations. And the Beatles are in the middle of it, dressed as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And this is a living sculpture. And this is the first time that I really saw an album cover that was what I would term a piece of art. And I suddenly realized, as Hypnosis, with my partner Storm, that the world was wide open on this wonderful canvas. I mean, the canvas of an album cover is this big. You know, a gatefold sleeve. And you know, it's not like now where you have a little CD or you had cassettes. It was a big canvas to work to, and it changed my world. I thought, I can do that. So it was interesting. But moving on to the cow. Yes, Storm Thorgerson and myself, we regarded this as a non-cover. And there's a dichotomy about this, because people say, what has it got to do with the music? Absolutely nothing. It has no title on it. It has no name of the band. And this was deliberate. This was nothing to do with the band. This was to do with us saying, we don't want that. We want to be against tradition. You know, I can't say the late 60s and early 70s, it was a time of revolution and in thinking. And I would say that it was lateral thinking. We were thinking across the board in terms of what would be different. And in the process of that thinking, and this is one of the subjects that we're talking about tonight, is how do you get to ideas? Well, with this cover, I didn't hear any music. I didn't go up to Abbey Road and study the lyrics. There wasn't any to study. I didn't even know the title of the album because Roger hadn't thought of it. And so we were sitting around one day and said, why don't we do something which is really very ordinary? And somebody said, what about a cow in a field? So we got a camera, we went out of London, found the first cow in the first field, took a photograph of it, brought it back, blew it up, I took it up to Abbey Road Studios, and I said, that's the cover. And all of Pink Floyd said, that's the cover. So it's partly serendipity, it's partly circumstance. It's not designed. This is just, again, what I would call a very Dadaist approach, and a very innocent approach. And it's just by circumstance. But I don't know, what do you feel about this cover of Hypnosis? What's your view about it?
Ulrike, maybe, what do you think about the White Album? Isn't it important in the combination of the time and maybe the background, especially in music and in combination of the band? So when does art get its importance, and why is it groundbreaking in this combination, or is it only a boring record cover for U2?
The White Album?
Yeah, maybe.
No, I mean, it's there are always different ways to express the same thing, of course, and so both are expressing something, and it's for an image, it's important the context in which it was taken, or also the time is really important. When you say we did it like because of being bored of always the same thing on a cover, so it's your reason why you do that, and it's a I would say it's kind of I mean, you was not searching for a cow or something, but you was searching for something which is a metaphor for the whole thing, that it has nothing to do with a cover or with the music, you know. And
You're right. It's a
yeah.
metaphor.
Yeah.
It is a metaphor.
Would you say it would have turned out differently if you had listened to the music before? If you would really be familiar with the record?
Well, I think in terms of design work, there are no rules. If I could just talk about design for 1 minute. I mean, there are basically 3 types of design, I think. One is where you have a product. You know, you have this bottle. You know, you're working for an advertising agency. You have to have the product in there. We didn't have that restriction. The second type of design is where somebody is working within an organization and they have to design something. They have to, you're working for an agency, you have to rank Xerox, and you have to have something to do with rank Xerox, and you have to have the words. The third type of design is somebody who's totally individual, who is not restricted by any kind of restrictions or any briefing. And we didn't know it at the time, but Hypnosis was incredibly privileged to be able to be free to think of anything. I mean, I don't know how many times in history that happens, but we were, for 15 years, able to do whatever we wanted and present them to people, and people either liked them or they didn't like them. And I have to say, not everything we did was successful by any means. But that sort of privilege to be able to come up with something, just an idea like a picture of a cow, is really lateral thinking from the normal rock and roll world. And you've got to remember, in the early 70s, late 60s, the creative people in record companies walked around with white sort of aprons on, and the executives all wore suits and ties. I know I'm wearing a suit and a tie today, but I'm not an executive. But they did. They walked, and they were very, very conservative. So when Hypnosis would walk in with an idea like that to the record company and say, this is the band's new album, and they'd say, well, where's the name? Where's the title? What's a cow got to do with the music? I would always go, nothing. And they didn't like us. They hated us for it. But part of that was bucking the system. You know, it was a time when people were burning cars in Paris, when people were rioting against the Vietnam War, when there was a lot of upheaval and unrest, when things in America were not going terribly well. There was riots in Chicago. You know, this was a time of upheaval and youthful upheaval. It was the end of the Vietnam War. And anything was possible. And if you wanted to be that adventurous, you could be. We were fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And so I can't really say any more than that about that.
Perfect moment to switch the cover, because yes, one cover, you know it. It's from Hypnosis 2. This is from the band 10cc. Look here, and as you might see, here's a small picture, and this is taken by Aubrey Powell. It's a sheep on a chair, or
it's a psychiatrist's couch.
Yeah, something like this, couch on the beach on Hawaii. And I think it was not maybe an expensive picture.
It was a very expensive picture.
Yeah, and I have a quote from your partner, Storm Thorgerson. I hope I translated it in right in English. First, take care of the art, then we'll get the money flowing.
Absolutely right. I'm sorry to interrupt it.
Maybe Ulrike, how can young designers manage to develop their own style and philosophy of art in a commercial environment?
I would say it's difficult like it always was. But and I have no recipe. But I would say you have to try to keep yourself as a creative person in a balance between earning money and between being creative. So, and sometimes it's more on the one side and sometimes it's more on the other side, luckily. But it's you can try to do it by reflect your work, what you are doing with the people you work together, and after reflection you take the next step, and maybe it's also to develop kind of a goal maybe, but you have to be flexible with goals and philosophies. You have to be flexible in your source and to develop your way. So something like that.
Yeah, I have a slightly different view, and one is bloody hard work. Because when hypnosis started, we worked 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. For 10 years, we worked non-stop, and partly because we enjoyed the work so much, and we were so dedicated. And I think dedication, in any artist who's dedicated in what they believe in, has a chance to make it and has a chance to do it. And it's very hard these days in lectures that I give to students, and I'm sure for yourself too. They always say to me, "Oh, how did you get there? How did you do that? How did you, how can I get there?" And I really only have that as an advice. Work hard, believe in what you do, and the money is irrelevant. The art comes first, and if you're good enough, the money comes later, and it does. And also I had 5 golden rules. One is the right place. You have to be in the right place. Put yourself in the right place. The other is you have to be in the right time. We were lucky, we were in the right time. The other is you need a little bit of talent. I'm not the best photographer in the world, but I knew how to take a photograph and I knew about composition. So that helped. The third thing is a little bit of luck. You need to be lucky in what you do. You have to have a little bit of fortune. And the fourth is so important, and this is really, this is where I put Andy Warhol again in the picture, because he was such a networker. It's who you know. I was lucky when I started because I went to school with Pink Floyd, and that may sound a bit sad, but I did, and when I was there at the right time. But knowing people, for young people, is the most important thing. They have to get in a foot in the door, and it's the only way to really do it. As I say, there are many more people who are much more talented than I am, but they will never have an opportunity because they just don't know the right people or do the right thing. And you have to work at it really hard and believe in what you're doing. I mean, would you not agree with this?
Yes, totally. I mean, that's basically the same for the musicians who are recording all these songs and albums. It's dedication that comes first, and a lot of luck involved. Maybe more luck than talent sometimes. Definitely. Yeah, I think so.
One question to you. I'm working also. I'm also a partner of a design agency, and for us, it's always difficult to do to integrate the own philosophy and style of art into the work, because we have a lot of commercial clients that forces us to change our product that we offer to them, and. Did you always had your own style, your own philosophy, or was there somewhere in your in the hypnosis background a point when you said, so now from now on we only want to do like this and this and this, and not only things that the client says?
No, right from the start, we were determined not to have photographs of the band on the front of album covers, not to do the normal boring stuff of large graphics, although it is on that cover you point there, but and to think very, very differently. Our view was it was better to have a bad idea on a record cover than a boring idea. And the other piece of philosophy was that a good idea is a good idea, you know. And I have to say that one of the things that hypnosis did, and this is a rather funny story I'm going to tell you, one of the things that we did was that we often thought of ideas and went out and photographed them, and they were for nobody in particular, and then we'd try and find a client to buy them. And I always remember that Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin, I was showing him an idea one day. It was just a maquette, a drawing, and he turned it over. On the back it said Wishbone Ash crossed out, 10cc crossed out, Pink Floyd crossed out, all these. And he said, have you shown this idea to all these other bands? And I said, yeah. And he got very angry with me and said, you were giving me second-hand goods. It's like selling me a second-hand car. I said, no, it's not. It's a good idea. If you don't like it, somebody else will have it. It looks great. So we were very, very upfront about that. And for my feeling is that if you've got a great idea, it's always going to be a great idea. And it doesn't matter who it's for. I mean, you know, I've seen many advertising agencies rip off ideas from hypnosis many times because they thought it was a good idea. And that is, plagiarism is the biggest form of flattery. So I've been very, very pleased about that. But I must just say one thing about this cover, it's very funny too, is because we had this idea of a sheep on a psychiatrist's couch. Well, the connotations are obvious about psychiatry and people going to psychiatrists, and of course water behind, which was a sea, which means very much about the psyche, especially in Jungian Freudian therapy. So I said to 10cc, look, I can't shoot this in England because it's grey and miserable. I need somewhere with these big waves and it's beautiful sunny weather. And they said, well, what do you think? I said, I want to go to Hawaii. Well, in the 1970s, the rock and roll business was awash with money, so they said, okay, go to Hawaii, go and shoot it there. Well, the only problem was when I got to Hawaii, obviously Jung and Freud had never got there because there was no psychiatrist couches to be found. And even more so, they don't have any sheep on Hawaii. So I felt a little bit foolish. So first of all, I had to have a psychiatrist couch made. In the meantime, I went looking for sheep, and I found one sheep. They had a farm at the University of Hawaii, and there was one sheep there. And I'm so sorry for that sheep, because I dragged it down to the beach, where it kept getting washed off that psychiatrist's couch into the sea and kept having to be rescued. And if you ever look at the picture of the sheep Big, he's got these eyes that are staring at me with absolute hatred. And in the end, I had to ask the veterinary surgeon to inject it with Valium to calm it down. I mean, shocking. You couldn't possibly do that now. You know, I'd have PETA against me, you know. But the interesting thing is I brought it back to England, and it's the most beautiful shot and most fantastic, and they'd spent a fortune sending me there and doing all this stuff, and it finishes up this big on the album cover.
That wasn't your decision?
No. This was Storm, my partner. He and I had huge arguments about that, but it just goes to show, you know, all the best laid plans can, you know, so it wasn't all plain sailing, but that was all part of the fun of it, you know. So. Do you think, I'll be interested to ask you a question. Do you think that there is the money around these days to be indulgent the way that we were for young people?
The money
Is the money out there to do the sort of things that we were doing now?
I'm not sure about that. I would say it was the golden age for creative people. You were in a sense of getting a lot of money for your creativity.
Yeah, I think the thing is that if you think about how albums sold, you know, you think about Stevie Wonder, he'd sell 20 million albums, Pink Floyd sold 65 million albums of Dark Side of the Moon. And now albums don't sell like that. You know, Taylor Swift, you know, who's a huge major star in America, will, you know, a big hit record will be 1-2 million albums, stuff like that. So there isn't the money anymore. And especially with all the downloading and Spotify and all the rest of it, the big money has gone out of it. The cream has gone from the record industry, and they're suffering as a result of that. And so an average album cover these days would probably be 3,000 euros. I was spending 50,000 euros. I had the golden age, it's true. Mm-hmm. And that allowed us to be indulgent. But, you know, again, it was a privilege. And I have to say that these rock and roll bands we worked for they were very brave in employing us. When I look at some of the covers that we did, like The Cow and others, they were very brave because basically they were rock stars, and rock stars don't generally have pictures of cows on the front of album covers.
Okay, I think it's important to find a balance between doing your own stuff and creating your own art and follow your own philosophy and own money, because if the importance is more to get some money to buy you things, then you maybe you can't follow your own art, and some lucky people can do this, and many can't do it. So I have two new covers here. It's follows the last question. This is one of my favorite covers. It's from Paul McCartney and the Wings. It's Venus and Mars, because I like the combination of the typography and the picture. And the other one is Animals by Pink Floyd. And the similarity and the special thing about these two covers is these are co-creations, and it's an example of how you can do it with another creative mind. So this is taking the picture by, I think, Linda McCartney and you, and art direction by Hypnosis, and Paul McCartney has done more, and this is art direction and the idea behind it by Roger Waters. So the question is, what is it like to develop with another person those ideas, and or maybe develop the vision of another creative mind, maybe. Mm-hmm. So is design a solo run, or is it democracy?
No, it's not democracy at all. With both those album covers, I was very depressed because we designed some images for both of those albums, and they've been rejected. And there's nothing worse than being rejected. It's a horrible feeling. And with Paul McCartney, for example, I went to Los Angeles, I sat with him and showed him all these ideas, and he said, yeah, they're all great, man, but I've got a much better idea, and it's two balls on a baize billiard table called Venus and Mars. And I said, okay. And Storm, my partner, who was a very, very difficult man and incredibly rude and fell out with nearly every single rock star we worked for, stood up and said, I think that's a shit idea, I'm going home. And left me to do it. And of course I was going to do it because it was Paul. And sometimes, you know, you do things for money. Not everything is about aesthetics. We had a studio to run, we had people to pay, we had you know, expensive equipment, Hasselblad cameras, all the rest of it. You know, we had a business to run. And when Paul said, will you do this? I said yes. You know, he was going to pay me a lot of money to do it, and there was a reason to do it. So I can't say that I feel that that is one of my favorite covers or that I feel particularly enamored about it. However, if you open up the inside of that cover, which I'd ask you to do now.
The picture, yes.
I had great fun. Paul said, I want to do an image for which looks like out of this world, like it's on Mars. So I spent a couple of weeks traveling all around California looking for a perfect place, and I found Lake Owens, which is not far from Las Vegas, and we went out there and we spent a couple of days staying in little motels. Me, Paul, Linda, the band. I mean, it was fabulous. And every day we'd have a picnic and we'd light a bonfire and have a barbecue, and you know, and it was the most relaxed time I ever spent with Paul McCartney. It was fantastic. And I have a very fond memory of that. So for me, that whole experience was worth doing it just for that picture. And I like that picture. I think it's a group shot, which is interesting because it's such a spacey landscape. You talked about Animals, the Pink Floyd cover. Well, again, we'd shown pictures of our ideas to Roger and the band, and Roger didn't like any of them. And I was sitting with Roger in his house in London, and his house overlooked Battersea Power Station, that amazing building there, and he just decided to have a pig made for their shows because they were starting to become very big. Since Dark Side of the Moon, they'd started to play to 90,000 people at a time, and he thought they were just 4 specks on a stage, little tiny people. So he wanted to create what he called electric theatre. And electric theatre, in his terms, was creating some kind of puppetry or inventing some sort of inflatable. So he started off with building this pig. And pigs had all kinds of connotations in those days, particularly about the police. Everybody referred to the police as pigs, so he thought flying the pig over the audience was a good thing. And we're sitting there and we're talking about what are we going to do for an album cover. And he said, why don't we fly the pig between the amazing chimneys of that power station? And so I said, okay. And that afternoon we went down, we wrecked the power station, and sure enough we did it. And it's the famous story of how we went to photograph the pig, and the pig flew away, broke free and flew away into the air lanes to Heathrow Airport. And all the air flights were cancelled that afternoon. I was arrested by the police, and I was accused of being in charge of an unidentified flying object, which was kind of funny. But at the same time, it wasn't funny because I was terrified. This pig had flown up into the air some 10,000 meters. I was terrified that it would be the worst aviation accident in history. And luckily, at night, it came down to the ground because helium contracts at night. And we managed to get it back and start again and do it again the next day. You couldn't do that now because health and safety would be all over you. But we did, and it worked out. But I was pleased to do it, and I was pleased to work with Roger on it, and I think it turned out to be an interesting cover. I'd be very interested to know what you feel about a cover like that.
I love the cover, but I think what's really interesting about it is the whole anecdote you just told us. Maybe if this cover would have been done nowadays, all these things wouldn't have happened because it would have been made in Photoshop, and no one would have put a pig just between the actual chimneys. And I think if you show that cover to a young person nowadays, everyone would guess that it's just put there digitally with Photoshop or other technology.
You're right.
And there's some sort of art form involved that's getting lost with that. But I'm sure, and you would have been glad to have like the opportunities sometimes, we have nowadays.
I'm so sorry. Excuse me. Now we have the chance to hear a question from the Facebook audience. Is it okay for you?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. We have a question from Timo, who is asking, were you ever inspired by music to design an artwork?
Very difficult. A lot of the clients we worked for, I loved the music. I loved the music of Pink Floyd. But there were a lot of clients that we worked for, I hated the music. And I somehow had to avoid getting emotionally attached in any way to the music or the lyrics of a band, because it would interrupt the creative process. I was interested in creating interesting pictures. And there were some bands that really influenced me, like 10cc, because they wrote such extraordinary lyrics. There's not many people who write about things like life's just a minestrone, or have you seen an eye full of the tower? They were clever, they were wordsmiths. And certainly I was influenced by their lyrics. But by and large, I tried to divorce myself from the music. Dark Side of the Moon is a very interesting example of how I heard the music, and sadly, we came up with other ideas for that too, and the band rejected those and said, go away and stop with your silly surrealist ideas and come up with something more like a chocolate box. Actually, it was a Black Magic chocolate box they quoted. And I said, well, that's not very interesting. They said, well, that's what we want. And Storm and I left Abbey Road Studios rather depressed. But about a week later, I was looking through a book, a French philosophy book, actually, and it has a photograph in it with a prism which showed sunlight coming through the window, creating a rainbow effect. And Storm said to me, I got it. And we just drew it up on a napkin. I took it up to Abbey Road and said, how about that? And they all went, yes, yes, yes. Who would have thought? It's probably one of the most iconic album covers still to this day from a little sketch on a napkin. You know, I mean, you read about Picasso doing that and you're impressed, you know, but I was just thought, just an idea. It's just serendipity, you know, and I often ask myself, if that album had sold 1,000 copies, would it be well known? Would it be famous? But Pink Floyd sold 65 million, and consequently I've benefited from that too. So I take my hat off to them for accepting it.
Ulrike, how about your influences with other art disciplines, music, film, and so on?
Actually, I'm inspired, can be inspired from super simple things in my daily life. Sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's a movie, sometimes just a talk, or I go on street and find some dirt and it inspires me for some reason, or bubblegum or whatever. Yeah, it is like that, I guess. And when I ask myself, why is it like that? And I would say it's maybe about reflection, your life and your daily process and what you heard, what you talk by yourself, your relationships and everything, and yeah, something like that.
And what's your...
I have another question from the live audience.
No problem.
This one is from Ida, and for all speakers. Did you ever have a lack of creativity, and if yes, how to come back to it again?
No. I've been creative since the day I was born. I'm creative now. I'm seeing things here as we're talking that inspire me. I find life so inspiring every minute of the day, and I'm always thinking how I can use it. I mean, I don't know any other way to live.
Yeah, that's what I said actually, that everything can be inspiring. It doesn't must to be the image or the talk or the whatever. It can be really small, easy things. And on the other hand, when you work professional, you have a kind of a methodic to develop a process, a creative process. Yeah.
Okay, it's maybe you. Do you?
About creativity?
Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a brave question or answer you gave, that you've never had something like a writer's block. I mean, speaking creatively, I think that's a big privilege, actually, and even to be focused on your work all the time and never had the desire to retire.
Some people call it madness.
Yeah.
Okay, for me it's like also I have a huge trust in my imagination, so I really don't think that I ever had a lack of creativity in my life before. Maybe I think maybe it comes in sometimes, but I don't think.
Yeah, but isn't it about curiosity? Be awake and see what's happened around you and think about it, and then something pops up, or have a lot of.
It's one of the things which I think is an interesting discussion to be had also, which is what do these record covers mean? I mean, we're talking about record covers, so I'm gonna say, you know, there's a view that they are commercial art. I was paid to create these images. People would say, oh, have you got an idea? Yeah, we've got an idea. We come up with an idea, and you buy it, and the transaction is made, and I'm paid for it. Or is it fine art? Is it art which is respected because of the images that are on there? People see the image, and they say, that is a piece of fine art that's really thought through carefully, and somebody's invented that, and it's not about a commercial product. And then there's other people who would say it's just a piece of cardboard that you throw away. And how many times have you walked past a market, you know, and there's some stalls there, and underneath one of the stalls there's an old cardboard box like that, and in it's full of record covers. because they're selling them for €2 each. And I sometimes walk by and I see one of my album covers in there and I think, oh, how fucking sad is that? So it's an interesting discussion about how important these are. They are important, and they have been important culturally and historically, especially with the bands that they're associated with. But is it fine art? Is it commercial art? Or is it just a piece of cardboard?
Okay, another question.
Yes, this one is from Nadine. Is there any cover or other creative outcome that you'd wish was created by you?
Probably. That's a very difficult question. Yeah, there probably are. There probably are covers that I've looked at and felt rather jealous about. I think probably Nirvana, with the baby under the water holding the $100 bill, I think is a work of genius. And I've often thought, Jesus, that's just the kind of cover that we would have created. Why couldn't I have thought of that? So yeah, I mean, I just came back from New York and I walked into the Andy Warhol exhibition at the Whitney. And I spent 3 hours walking around some of the greatest pictures I've ever seen. It was a fantastic retrospective. And I walked out of there and I just thought, oh my God, why could I not have thought of some of those things? So yes, I'm very envious, the horrible word, but of some people's abilities. And yes, there are covers that I wish I could have done. You know, but you can't do everything and you can't work for everybody. And I'm very happy with where I've been, but yeah, definitely.
I think what's also interesting is how big is the impact of the actual album cover. Would Pink Floyd have sold 65 million copies if they had a box full of chocolates on the cover, or if there wouldn't have been the baby with the dollar bill in the pool on Nirvana's Nevermind, but just a plain white or black image or something no one really cares about or not iconic at all. And that's maybe the more important question, as opposed to define, is it commercial art, is it fine art? That's actually what I'm wondering. How big is the impact?
Well, I think it's also a competitive attitude, because if you cast your mind back, for those people who are old enough to remember, in the 1970s and 60s, 70s and 80s, there were huge emporiums which had thousands of album covers in. So on a Saturday afternoon, you go to buy your record that you wanted for that day, but you might buy a second one. And to stand out in the crowd and create an album cover which was remarkably different from everybody else's was a very important thing to do. And we were never conscious of that. But I have to say, when I used to walk into Tower Records or something, or some huge thing, and I'd see one of our covers, they did stand out a bit from everybody else's, and I think that probably did help the band. Certainly a bad cover would be very derogatory for a band, but a good cover would definitely help.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about tools. I have 2 new record covers here. The first one is, you mentioned it before, it's The Saucer Full of Secrets by Pink Floyd, and I think it's the first record cover you designed with Hypnosis. And the second one is the third album of Peter Gabriel. I think it's also called Melt, because of the melting images. And those 2 covers have the special about these covers are these are made by hand. Me and my design agency, I always sit in front of the computer creating things and always looking at the screen. So in those times where those covers were created, they were made by hand with scissors and glue and scratching over the photos and so on. So the question is, different tools and different workflows, how does the tool influence the process of making art and design? Maybe Ulrike.
Of course, the tools is it's also a message. So, but if Photoshop has special tools, you will see it in the image again. Or you, for example, when we had this incredible freehand time, maybe you remember that?
Yes, I remember.
Everything was made with freehand, so or Quark Express, like this, all the squares.
Yeah.
So of course, the tool, it's really, you have to know about that. And I mean, of course, if you use a pencil, what is a pencil? Pen?
A brush.
A brush, you see it, and you have to use your tools bewusst,
Yeah, but
by conscious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay. Sometimes I feel like it's maybe the screen and the computer is like a cage, where you have to break out and use some scissors and brushes to let your imagination and creativity flow. But you said to me that you were very lucky when the computer came, so you didn't have so much work.
Well, I absolutely embrace modern technology, and I know a lot about it, and I work in it a lot, you know, in augmented realities and all that kind of stuff. And oh my God, if I'd had Photoshop in the 1970s, I tell you what took me 6 weeks to do, I could do in 6 hours now. But there is a pro and con to all this. One is that in the 1970s, it took a very long time to do these pictures. Many album covers would take 3 months. And there was a lot of process of decision-making slowly. You'd choose a composition. I mean, well, just the actual physical thing of doing it, taking a photograph, having to have the film processed, go in the dark room, and be very selective about what images you chose from the negatives, and then blowing up only those pictures, and then putting them around the wall and saying, I like that one more than that one, or whatever it was. But the process of selection was much more time-consuming and also more delicate in a way and more deliberate. Nowadays, somebody phones you up and says, I want a picture, they want it now. There's no chance to sit around and say, oh, hang on a second, let's just see, do we prefer that image to that image to that image, and dwell on it and really think about it. And we were privileged to have that time to do that. And the thing I don't like about modern technology is the issue of wanting things now, because everybody wants something now. You don't have time. You know, people, I mean, I'm working in the business all the time still, designing, making films, I'm just doing 2 album covers for Pink Floyd right now. And it's got to be tomorrow. You know, there's release dates, there's things to happen. It's like there's no, and I send them out to the band and we talk about them, and at the end of the day, I would like to have time to dwell on them and really work it out. And if it didn't work out, then I'd like to do it again. There's no time for that. So modern technology has brought with it a sort of no time for contemplation, I'd say. Whereas before, we had the luxury of that. And that's the difference. But I love digital. I love it.
Okay, we have a question from the audience.
Yes, we have 2 questions. I'll start with the question from Janis first. Mr. Powell, as vinyl is having a comeback, do you think there might be a chance of Hypnosis comeback too?
Yeah, Hypnosis has never gone away. Hypnosis is a company that we started. I started with Storm Thoughts in 1968, and it still exists as Hypnosis today. As I say, I'm doing 2 new album covers right now for Pink Floyd, for various projects that they're doing. I don't always, you know, I don't always these days do projects that, you know, just because they're handed to me on a plate. I turned down Noel Gallagher of Oasis a couple of years ago because I just didn't like the way it was looking and how it was going. You know, so it's not just a question of, you know, I'm being more choosy about what I want to do, I suppose, is the reality of it. But yes, Hypnosis album covers are still happening, and many other images from Hypnosis. It's still going on. The legacy lives on. So,
but why do you have still this motivation to do it?
Oh my God, the day the phone doesn't ring, I'm finished. I would be bored shitless. I mean, I'm not a golfer. I'm not the kind of guy who can relax and lie in the sun. You know, I hate all that. what I like most is it being involved creatively and with creative people. I have a huge team that works with me for things like this exhibition. I'm working on a museum project in London. I'm working on another exhibition in America. I've got a film that I'm about to do. You know, it's God forbid. I'm 72. God forbid that the phone stops ringing. I would be lost in space. I don't know what I would do. I really don't. Go shopping, I guess. Dedication, remember that.
The second question is from Volkan. He asks, which is your favorite Pink Floyd album? And which album cover of Pink Floyd do you think really covers its songs?
Wish You Were Here. The album cover that I did for Wish You Were Here with the man on fire, two businessmen shaking hands, is a perfect example of hypnosis working to lyrics and to the music. If there was ever a cover, that was it. Because when I went to Abbey Road and listened to the songs and read the lyrics, things like Have a Cigar, which is a track on the album, which is about the insincerity and absence of sincerity of people in the music industry. And there's that famous story which comes from one of the lyrics, which is where Pink Floyd went to the record company in California, and the head of the record company walked up to them and said, "Hey guys, which one of you is Pink?" You know, I mean, they didn't even know that the band was called Pink Floyd, you know. And so when I took the ideas, I have to say Storm Thorgerson, my partner, thought up the idea of the Burning Man. It's about two men shaking hands, and one of them is getting burnt in the deal. And the band liked the idea. We then had to do it. Like everything with hypnosis, the biggest problem was we come up with these fantastic fantasies, and the next thing, somebody said, okay, and then we had to think about how we're going to do it. And I remember sitting with Storm, and I said, so how are we going to do this? Because there wasn't Photoshop. And he said, we're going to set a man on fire. So we did. And it was exciting to do that sort of thing. It was an adventure, you know, and a challenge to do that sort of thing. And I always remember Ronnie Rondell, the guy who's on fire, was a famous stuntman in America. And I still see him occasionally, and every time he says to me, you know, I did the Bond films, I did the Towering Inferno, you know, I did all these famous fire films, and he said, everybody knows me for that damn Pink Floyd cover. So, you know, it resonates, but definitely that cover was related to the music and the lyrics, and in a way, it's almost like a cartoon of that. It's a deliberate reflection. And I'm very proud of that cover. I don't particularly like Dark Side of the Moon, funnily enough. I'm not really interested because I love narrative stories. But Wish You Were Here tells a narrative, and I think it worked really well. That's my favorite.
Nice, thank you. Okay, I have a question, I think, first for Dennis. And two new record covers. Maybe you don't know these two covers, but this one is only 1 month old, and this maybe a few years. It's the rock cover album of The Wall, and this is a dub reggae cover album of Dark Side of the Moon. I call it Dub Side of the Moon. And my question is, why is the art of the past becoming more and more important today?
I'm not sure if it's becoming more important to people than it was before, but I think it's more of a statement nowadays, because if you look at how people usually listen to music on their smartphones, and usually they don't care about the artwork that much, just because it's a 2-inch by 2-inch image, and if you think of the dog on the psychiatrist's couch, it would be impossible
sheep.
to. Yeah, it's sorry, a sheep. Yeah,
Work
it's a
with
big
animals,
difference,
yeah.
actually. Yeah, it's even on the vinyl cover, it's can be overseen very easily, but on that kind of super small image, it's invisible. So, but there are people who still care about the art form of record covers, and there's a lot of passion involved, and people are consciously buying vinyl records, and it's not only about the music itself or the sound of a vinyl record, which isn't perfect, and it's not easy. You can't take it with you on the train or into the car, but it's also because of the cover and the way of owning a piece of art, maybe even if it's just a reproduction, and then there's 10,000 copies around, and so it's these people are very they are making a very conscious decision of buying this and wanting this and experiencing it, and so that's important. Still is important.
I agree. I think there's a return to vinyl, and you're right about the sound. The sound is different. The sound is warmer. It's great to listen to, but there is something very tactile. I relate it to like a Kindle. Kindles are something that you look at, and you've got the story, you've got the narrative of the book, and it's all wonderful and fine. You can take it on holiday and lie on the beach and read your Kindle. It's easy. But gosh, there's nothing like having a decent book in your hand and holding it and turning the pages and reading it like that. And books, a Kindle will never replace the excitement and joy of holding a book in your hand and buying it. And the same applies to the album cover. And for those of you who look back to it, buying album covers and the joy, you bought it in the record shop, you took it home, you took the shrink wrap off, you delicately took the album out so not to get fingerprints on it. You read the cover from all the lyrics to anything they had to say in there. It was the one message that the band could give to the public about themselves, because if you look back to the 70s and 80s, there were very few music magazines and newspapers. We didn't have MTV, we didn't have VH1, we didn't have Spotify, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have any of those kind of things. So the album cover was the translation of what the band wanted to give to its buying public, to say, this is where we're at right now. I mean, I don't care if it was the Eagles Hotel California. That summed up, that cover, whether you liked it or not, summed up the Eagles. That was absolutely a perfect example. Or David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, that summed him up right there. So the person buying the album would look at it and say, okay, I know where the guys are at. And this was a message. It was a message board. It was a translation, if you like. And that's what was so important about the album cover, because there was nothing else. I mean, in England, we had 2 TV programs, Top of the Pops and the Old Grey Whistle Test, which was on about midnight once a week. And they were pretty dull programs. And certainly some of the bands that we've talked about, Pink Floyd, would never get on any of those programs. So you had no chance to see your favorite artist, because it would be, Mud or I don't know, some other Cliff Richard or the English. I'm talking about English artists that were middle of the road. And so, again, it became an important translation, as I said, from artist to buyer, to public buyer, to say, this is where we're going and this is what we're doing. And people absorbed it. And they could roll joints on it. That was the most important thing. A nice big flat spliff while you were listening to your music.
Unfortunately, I have to ask a last question because of the time, but it's a really big question, so I will ask it to the three of you. But it's a combination with a new cover. It's this one. Sex Pistols, Never Mind the Bollocks, and have another quote. I think it's by you. I read it. I remember one of them wearing a T-shirt saying, "I hate Pink Floyd," and I thought times are changing. We were still playing Crosby, Stills, and Nash and wearing velvet trousers. Even worse, the brilliant cover of the Sex Pistols, Never Mind the Bollock, must have cost about 2 pence. Storm and I looked at each other and said, "You know what? The writing's on the wall for our style." So I think it sounds like this is music for a new generation and design for a new generation. And the question is, a really big question, can art change our society, or does society change art? Maybe you're the first one to answer.
I would say society creates art and art influences society. So it's a relationship between both of each other. And I would say it's art or design, it's kind of a mirror of society again. So, yeah.
I have a slightly different view. I think that art can change society, and I think this is a perfect example of it. If we look at the period of time, 1976, when the Sex Pistols came out, and with all the furore that surrounded them, and they brought out this cover, the writing was on the wall, as you correctly identify, that suddenly I was used to spending $50,000 on an album cover, and they were used to spending €2. So, first of all, I was going to go out of business, so I needed to change my thought process pretty quickly. But also, the fact that punk and punk attitude, which still prevails today, we see it everywhere, it's had a huge influence. I think that that cover and that music actually has, you know, it must be, what, 40 years old nearly? And it's had an influence on society. You know, it made people very angry. Suddenly we went from a hippie kind of world of, you know, Crosby, Stills and Nash, as you say, into something that was a rage, an anger. And I see that happening in the world right now. And what I'm looking forward to is hearing the music and the art that's going to go with it. Because there's a lot of angry people out there politically with what's happening here in Germany, for example, that I see in Italy, that I see in America with Trump. People are pissed off. And I welcome change. I welcome radical, revolutionary notions. And that changes society. And I think music and art, with music, has a big part to play in that.
Would you say it's harder these days to create radical art that, you know, really translate this?
No, it's not. But what is harder is to get away with it. Because surveillance systems, the way the police and the authorities operate now, you can't just go out in the streets and have a revolution and start burning cars and trashing windows and throwing bricks and stones. You're going to be arrested, you're going to be prosecuted, you're going to be thrown in prison. Years ago, we didn't have all that. So when we did that, we were not going to be faced with the possibility of a ruined life. Nowadays, they can ruin your life. But I still believe in my heart of breaking the man. Break the man. You know, let's get back. I mean, I'm depressed by young people, I'll tell you that, because I don't mean to refer to you, but I refer to my daughter's generation who are apathetic to the politics of today. And I don't really get it. I don't really get why they're not standing up and fighting in music and in politics and in art for a belief system that is to the benefit of us all, and not to have us walked over by people like Trump and other people in Europe who are perhaps not behaving as we would like them to. So, young people, bring it on, for fuck's sake. Let's have some more of it.
Interesting point. When Trump got elected, we heard several statements of punk rock and hardcore punk rock bands saying that it's good for the music, actually. We're glad that he got elected because now we have something to write about again. But we just talked about it. We don't really see that coming right now.
No,
there's no reaction, actually.
There's very little reaction, and I'm upset about it. I mean, maybe I live in the past where there was a lot of revolution in the air, but I think it will come, because I think people are getting disillusioned and fed up, and I want to see it. I want to see it in music. I want to see it in art, and I'm sure it's going to happen.
Very nice last words. So, unfortunately, we are done for this 4th edition of the Work of Art for today. And I want to thank you all. Thank you, Ulrike. Thank you, Dennis and Aubrey. And thank you to everyone here. And thank you to the audience at Facebook Live that joined us in this edition. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sind wir raus? Okay. Okay, thank you. So you can, Aubrey? So, excuse me. So you have the chance to do some questions to Aubrey Powell now. We are not we are not live now at Facebook, so this is ask him any question. Hello. So, who wants to join?
Anybody want to ask any questions? Or are we all going to go outside and start burning cars and fighting in the streets?
So
Street
yes,
fighting men and
The
women.
first one.
Anybody want to ask anything? I'm actually, if you don't, go on, please.
Hello. I've one question. Several weeks ago, I was in Berlin in your hypnosis exhibition.
Thank you.
It was great. I loved it. And I heard that it goes on tour now. And I wanted to ask you if you already know whether it's around the Ruhr area someday.
I hope so. I tell you, I'm very impressed with the German people, and I'd like to thank you because I was asked to do this exhibition in Berlin by somebody, and I had no preconceived ideas about it, and I hadn't had an exhibition since Storm died 5 years ago. So I was a little bit nervous about it. So, and the gentleman who put it on, I asked him to choose the pictures, to curate it. I didn't want to do it myself. And he chose very interesting pictures. He chose some pictures were nothing to do with rock and roll and nothing to do with album covers, as you probably saw. But there were surreal images that I'm very proud of. Anyway, in 6 weeks, we had over 10,000 people go. And that really touched my heart, that Berliners, 10,000 of them went there to see those pictures and appreciated them. And
Fantastic.
I thought it was wonderful, and I thank the German people for that. It was terrific. The answer to your question, yes, is going on tour. We're starting off in small cities first. We're going to Lundberg in January, and then we're going to Wilhelmshaven, then Hamburg, and then I think it's going to Leipzig and Stuttgart and Munich, and I'm not sure what the schedule is, but certainly from that and the press we've received and the TV coverage, it's been fantastic. So yes, it is going on tour, and I'm overwhelmed by it, actually. It's fantastic.
So, okay, I'm waiting until John Colton will
Yes,
make it official.
I'm sure he'll let you know.
Thank you.
It'll be on his website, yeah. Anybody else got any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to tell a funny anecdote. Okay.
Another question.
And it's to do with album covers. It's to do with the importance of album covers. You know, that was one of the questions that I didn't really get to answer. And I wanted to say what it was like in the 1970s. In the mid-70s, I got a phone call from a band called Black Sabbath. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this band, but they're a heavy rock band, and they're notorious for their outrageous behavior. They wanted an idea from an album cover, so I had some ideas, and I went up to see them. They lived outside Birmingham in England. And I got to the studio, and I walked in, and there were only 3 of the band there. There was this notorious lead singer called Ozzy Osbourne who was not present. And the 3 band were sitting there, and I laid the ideas around the wall, and they were all drawn on bits of card. We would cheered for napkins since then. And anyway, so they looked at them, and they decided, oh, yes, this one, this is great, fantastic. We'd all just decided on the right image for them. And suddenly the door burst open in the studio, and there stood a guy in a black hat, black glasses, black leather trousers, black boots. It was Ozzy Osbourne. And he was swaying from side to side like this, and I knew that he was probably drunk and out of his mind on drugs. So he swaggered in and said, "What's going on?" And Tony Iommi, who's the guitarist, said, "We've just chosen the album cover." And he walked up and down, looked at them all like this, and he said, "That one." And Tony Iommi said, "That's lucky, because that's the one we've all chosen." At which point, Ozzy turned round and smacked him in the face as hard as he could, and a fight broke out. It was absolute chaos in the studio. So I quickly gathered up the ideas, and I thought I better make myself scarce. And I was ushered out the door by the manager, who said to me, "I think that went pretty well, don't you?" I was fairly shocked, by this, and I said, "How do you mean?" And he said, "Well, at least we got a decision on the album cover." And the reason I tell this story is because it shows how important it was to get a decision about an album cover for a band, because you've got 4 individuals in the band, say, they're all different, they all probably hate each other, and they'll all have different views about what should be the album cover. But the album could not come out without a cover and a decision on it. So it was important that there was synergy between me, or Storm and Hypnosis, and those bands. And we were treated very royally in those days. We were treated a bit like the sort of fifth wheel of the car. It was an essential ingredient to the band. And that was a fantastic privilege to have that. But it does show that without the agreement of the band on something, an album would never be released. And album covers were important. Anyway, I just tell that story just because you might be interested. But it was fun. It was a funny moment for me.
Yeah, you mentioned that you love digital art. Was there any album cover that you couldn't make it possible with the lack of design tools or something like
Yes. Sometimes we were overly ambitious. And I have to say, I can think of several covers. We used to call them turkeys because they were crap, they were rubbish, they were dreadful. And they were just overly ambitious. There were things that we could not do. I mean, in Photoshop now, I could do them in a heartbeat. But actually, in those days, we physically couldn't do them. And we drew them out, and we thought they were great ideas, but when they actually were realized, they weren't very good. And it's very interesting because I bought a book out last year, which I'll hope you all buy. But it's in it, the publisher said to me, "We want every single album cover," which is some 400 odd album covers. And I said, "I don't want to do that. I don't want to show the album covers I'm not proud about." And he said, no, it's essential. You do this because we want to see the journey of from the bad to the good, from the bad to the good, from the bad to the good, because you can definitely see there's a ride there of how you got places, how you came from this idea that wasn't very good to that idea that really worked well. So I was dubious about that. But when I finished the book and it was published, I realized he was right. And like any other artist in any other field, you can't be 100% good all the time. Sometimes you do rubbish work, and that's just the way it is. And that applies to anybody from Salvador Dali to Picasso downwards. You know, you do the best you can, and with absolutely a conviction of what you're doing. But sometimes things don't work out. Francis Bacon, the famous painter, what I loved about him was that he used to endlessly be distressed by his pictures, so he used to take a blade and cut them out and throw them away. And his gallerists, the Marlborough Gallery, used to have to rush round early in the morning, because generally he was hung over in the mornings, and run in there and take canvases off his easel while they were still wet to sell, otherwise they wouldn't get any, because he'd inevitably cut them out and throw them away. So, yeah, not everything is great, but one keeps hoping. Yes?
I don't actually have a question, but I'd like to say something
Okay.
regarding something that you said earlier about young people,
Yes.
because I disagree with that.
Jolly good.
I think you were talking about your children, right?
Yes.
Because, I mean, I don't really know how old your children are, but are they what you would call young
Early
people?
20s.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm just
we are talking
maybe I'm
about the same
depressed. Maybe
generation,
I'm
okay.
depressed with them.
Okay.
They don't want me to hear them say that. No, I'm sorry, but it's not. times are different, and we have social media now, so people make a lot of noise and complaint on social media. I mean, if you want to have a riot, get on social media and you'll have 10,000 people standing outside the door within an hour. So it's done differently. It's done differently. But what I do experience is, I know, for example, let's take this horrible thing, Brexit, which I'm deeply embarrassed about, I have to say. But let's take that, for example. I know that a lot of young people did not vote in that, and that pissed me off, because it's such an important thing for their future. I don't want to get into a political debate here, but they had the opportunity and they didn't take it. And that's kind of what I mean about being part of a movement. So, and I'm sure you have radical feelings, and I'm sure you act them out in your own way, but they probably are done through social media, not through, and I'm not advocating burning cars and smashing shop windows, don't get me wrong. That was the old days. Do you think I was wrong then to say that?
I just disagree with your feeling that young people are more apathetic now, because when I look at my friends and my peers, I really don't see that. As you said, a lot of it is happening on social media, but I mean, there's really not many riots around here. But
No.
I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, because one of the things that we're really concerned about is the environment, and not creating trash, not destroying property if it doesn't
Agreed.
have to be destroyed. So that would kind of go against that. But I mean, there's demonstrations everywhere. There's, I don't know, this year alone there was March for Life, March for Science.
Absolutely.
Hambi bleibt in Germany. There's another demonstration in Berlin this Saturday.
Yes, I was there in Berlin when they had the demonstration.
Great.
Yeah. No, I have not. It has not gone. And I apologize if I was being I was using a generalization. I didn't mean to. But
I'm not offended.
no, I apologize. There are a lot of demonstrations and riots, and I welcome it. I was kind of putting it more in the context of this, really, of, for example, particularly this, a change of mood, a change of atmosphere, where people really, really are making a difference. And it shows in art. When there's huge social upheaval and change, it shows in art. So I'm sure this will come with what's happening. Well, I do apologize if you felt offended by that.
No, as I said, I'm not offended. I just wanted to say that I see a lot of political art. And I mean, I see... It's probably true that it's young people aren't as outward anymore. They may not be as political on the outside, but that doesn't mean that they aren't radical. They have a lot of radical ideas, and I see a lot of art which reflects those ideas. And but as you said, the thing is, the art I see, it's mostly on social media, or you can buy it in a store. It's not widely available because that's expensive, as you said.
Yeah.
Whereas if I just post something that I drew, which has very political content on Instagram, for example, thousands of people will see it and resonate with it, and it will still be seen, but I don't have to pay a penny for it.
Yes.
But also, the only people that will see it will be the ones that are kind of like me, who use Instagram. Probably,
yes.
I'm not,
And
I don't
YouTube.
want to accuse you of not using social media, but...
No, I do.
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean,
I-
of course
You
it's...
should come up here. I should go down there. You could lecture me. No, I understand what you're saying, and I'm probably speaking out of turn. It's just in my own personal experience. I'm pissed off with my own children for not being more demonstrative, I suppose. But you know about art that's becoming radical and stuff like that. I would love to know about it.
Okay.
I'd love to see it.
I'd love to
Thank you.
show it to you.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, just...
We have only 5 minutes left, and the film 1 minute. So
We'll have this conversation
but
later.
This is a perfect point, because after one more question.
Just a short question, because I was so surprised to hear how the process with the bands were in former years, because I'm not, of course not, in the music business, but I was really surprised to hear that as you said, it was a decision between your company or you as a person and the person from the band, and then they decided on an album, that's it, and we go produce it. I couldn't imagine that there was no record company who said, no, with this cow on the cover, we don't give the money, because I don't think that the bands gave the money. Was there never a conflict?
No. They didn't pay. We only ever worked for the bands, never for the record companies. And that was a conscious decision at the beginning.
So there were no record company in between?
No.
I see.
In those days, all the bands I worked for, nearly all of them, in their contracts, they had creative control.
Thank you. That's because I couldn't imagine that could happen today.
No,
I thought always a company would say, we cannot sell this or that.
No, there was an album cover I did for Led Zeppelin, which I always quote, and you may or may not know it, but it was it's called Presence, and there was a picture of a black object on the cover with a family sitting at a table having supper at a boat show. Okay, and this was hugely received as a piece of art and a piece of work from us. And can you imagine a band like Led Zeppelin, a heavy rock band, you know, people would expect Jimmy Page with his guitar and Robert Plant with his curly hair and a microphone on the front cover. But, you know, these are intelligent guys. And Jimmy Page, I remember, he walked into my hotel room and he asked me to come up with an idea, and all I had on the table of my hotel room was this black object. And he walked in and he said, I understand that. There it is. See? Okay, now, is that a heavy rock band album cover? I don't think so. So all I had was this black object, and Jimmy Page walked in and said, I got it straight away. I got it. And what's interesting about it was, actually, it's supposed to be something about Led Zeppelin. When we were thinking about it, and our thinking processes of how we worked this out, was actually, we thought, everybody needs Led Zeppelin. They're the biggest rock band in the world, so how can we show this? So we decided to create an object which everybody had to have. And if you look through the inside of the album cover and stuff, there's all kinds of people playing golf, there's surgeons in operating theaters, there's all sorts of things, and they all have this black object. And the idea is the battery of life. So Led Zeppelin with a battery of life, and if you didn't have it, you couldn't live. So this is a very kind of symbolic piece and a very esoteric and vague piece for people to work out, but it's a mystery. And what's more exciting than getting an album cover, a heavy rock album cover, and there's a mystery in it. So you can use your imagination to work out what the narrative is. And some people were, I was with a journalist the other day, and he had a whole load of ideas about this cover, and I sat there listening, and I just said, you're so wrong, man. It wasn't anything about that at all. It's about this. But what's great is you have a different view to me, and that makes the world go round. That's exciting when, you know, so two different people have a different view.
Nice words. Thank you very much. So,
thank you.
You have the chance to continue this talk after the movie. So our timetable says that we now show the movie Making the Dark Side of the Moon, and after this we will have a second question and answer and signing, if you like. So stay and enjoy the film. Thank you very much.